I'm Larissa and I'm reading Looking for JJ. Everyone was looking for Jennifer Jones. She was dangerous, the newspaper said. She posed a threat to children and should be kept behind bars. The public had the right to know where she was. Some of the weekend papers even skirted the old headline, "A Life for a Life." Alice truly read every article she could find. Her boyfriend, Frankie, was bemused. He couldn't understand why she was so fascinated. He put her arm around her shoulder and dipped his mouth into her neck while she was reading. Alice tried to push him away, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. And in the end, the newspaper crumpled and slipped to the ground. Alice couldn't resist Frankie. He was bigger and taller than her, but that wasn't difficult. Most people were. Alice was small and thin and often bought her clothes cheaply in the children's section of clothes shops. Frankie was a giant beside her and liked to pick her up and carry her around, especially if they were having an argument. It was his way of making up. She was lucky to have him. She much preferred to read articles about Jennifer Jones when she was on her own. It meant waiting until Rosie, the woman she lived with, was out at work. It gave her plenty of time. Rosie worked long hours. She was a social worker and had lots of clients to see. In any case, the stories about Jennifer Jones weren't around all the time. They came in waves. Sometimes they roared from the front page, the headlines bold and demanding. Sometimes they were tiny, a column on an inside page, a nugget of gossip floating on the edge of the news, hardly causing a ripple of interest. When the killing first happened, the news was in every paper for months. The trial had thrown up dozens of articles from all angles.
Sarah Worley, can you come to the main office, please? Sarah Worley, the main office.
The events on that terrible day at Berwick Waters, the background, the home life of the children, the school reports, the effects on the town, the law regarding children, and murder. Some of the tabloids focused on the seedier side, the attempts to cover up the crime, the details of the body, the lies told by the children.
Call 226, please. This is Richard. Call 226.
Alice truly hadn't seen any of these at the time. She'd been too young. In the past 6 months, though, she had read as much as she could to get her hands on. And the question that lay under every word that has ever been printed was the same. How could a 10-year-old kill another child? In the weeks leading up to the 9th of June, Alice Julie's 17th birthday, the story started again. Jennifer Jones had finally been released. She had served 6 years for murder. The judge called it manslaughter, but that was just a nice word. She had been let out on license, which meant that she could be called back to prison at any time. She had been relocated somewhere far from where she was brought up. She had a new identity, and no one would know who she was and what she had done. Alice fell hungrily on these reports, just as she sat coiled up and tense in front of Rosie's telling, using her thumb to trace past the satellite channels, watching every bit of footage of the Jennifer Jones case. The news program still used the only photo that there have ever been of the 10-year-old girl. A small girl with long hair and a fringe, a frowning expression on her face. JJ was the girl's nickname. The journalist loved it. It made Alice feel weak just to look at it. On the morning of her birthday, Rosie woke her up with a birthday card and a present. "Here, sleepyhead." Alice opened her eyes and looked upwards at Rosie. She had her dark suit on and the white striped blouse she always wore with it. Her hair was tied back off her face, making her look serious and stern. Instead of her usual hanging earrings, she was wearing gold studs. It's not the way Rosie liked to dress. "Don't tell me you're in court today," Alice said, sitting up, stretched her arms out, ruffling her fingers through her own short hair. "You guessed it," Rosie said. "Here, take this, birthday girl." Alice took the present while Rosie walked to the window and pushed it open. A light breeze wafted in, lifting the net curtains. Alice pulled the duvet tight up to her neck. "Do you want me to freeze to death?" she said jokingly. Rosie took no notice. She loved fresh air. She spent a lot of time of her own opening windows, and Alice spent a lot of her time closing them. Inside the wrapping paper was a small box, the kind that held jewelry. For a moment, Alice was worried. Rosie's taste in jewelry was a bit too arty for her. She lifted up the lid off gingerly and saw a pair of gold tiny earrings. "These are lovely," Alice said, and Frank felt a strange lump in her throat. More your taste than mine," Rosie said, looking in Alice's wall mirror and pulling at her jacket, using the flats of her hands to smooth out her skirt. She looked uncomfortable. Alice got out of bed and stood beside her. She held an earring up to the ear and nodded approvingly. Then she squeezed Rosie's arms. You're on late this week, Rosie said. Alice nodded. She didn't have to be at work until 10. I'll be home early, so I'm going to cook a special meal, Rosie said, and it's not only your birthday we're celebrating next Saturday, you'll be here for 6 months. That was true. 6 months of waking up every morning in that bedroom and eating in Rosie's kitchen and seeing her name on letters, Alice Truly, 52 Phillip Street, Croton. My mom's coming. What about Frankie? Rosie had been making a special cake that had been hidden from Alice. Her mother, Kathy, a funny Irish woman, was helping her. He can't come, she said. She didn't bother to explain. Frankie said he felt awkward around Rosie, as though she was watching him, waiting to tell him off every time he touched Alice. He preferred it when they were alone. Oh well, it'll just be the three of us then. After Rosie left, Alice sat on the bed holding the earrings and looking at her card. There'd be nothing from her mother. She knew that. She sat very still for a moment, aware of her own body, trying to read her own sensations. Was she upset? She had other presents and cards. She had Frankie and her friends from the coffee pot. Then there was Rosie herself. Rosie with her powerful hug and no-nonsense manner. Rosie who smelled of lemons and garlic and basil, and who were always trying to flatten her up. Dear, sweet Rosie. Alice hadn't known such people existed. The sound of the letterbox distracted her. She got up and took her card to the mantelpiece and stood it up. Then she walked downstairs to the front of the door where the morning paper was sticking through the letterbox. She pulled it out, taking care not to gaze it or tear the pages, and took it back to the kitchen. Without looking, she laid it down on the kitchen table and got on making her breakfast. She tipped out some cereal and poured milk into her bowl. 1 dessertspoon of sugar was all she wanted. Then she got out the orange juice and poured herself exactly half a glass. Where eating was concerned, she had a routine. She wasn't fussed about her weight or her shape. She just ate what she wanted, and no amount of persuasion from anyone was going to change that. She sat down and flattened the newspaper. There again was the headline she expected. Jennifer Jones, free after 6 years. Is this justice?